White Sox fans, we are recording. It is something called, oh my gosh, it's new to since we've moved to the StreamYard platform. In fact, this you may be familiar with. It's a classic podcast. It's an old timey podcast from way back in the day. We called it Dugout Metrics. Some facts for you. This is number 8. Some facts for you. Number 7 was a playoff preview. That tells you how long it's been, because the White Sox in the playoffs, it seems like a decade, but it actually has only been a couple of years. The one before that was addressing the trade deadline 2021. So it's been a while, but we are back with Dugout Metrics, and we actually lead off with breaking news. We have made a trade to bolster our pitching staff. We have dealt Luke Smailes. Luke Smailes is not with us here. He has been traded off into the podcast universe in order to acquire some pitching. We need to bolster the staff because we had none, unless you count me wiffle balling sidearm. So Malachi Hayes has now joined our Dugout Metrics team for his debut in number 8. Not many you haven't missed many, Malachi, so it's good. You'll catch right up with the team culture and the signs and all that. We'll go over that after the podcast. I have a suspicion that in a couple days, I'm negotiating right now, with Luke. It's one of those, sign and trade. It's like a Lucas Giolito thing. We have a chance still to re-sign Luke Smailes. And I have a feeling in a couple days, because believe it or not, after 2 years, we're going to hit you with 2 Dugout Metrics back to back. Luke is going to join me. I'm not sure if anyone else is, but it might be just a one-on-one with Luke to discuss his series of articles that he's written. One's already published. By the time you see it, all 3 will be published, running down all the college draft choices for the White Sox. So that's a cool piece. The first one that we've already read, pretty insightful. So that's going to be fun. Again, this is all hinging on whether we can come to terms. I don't know. I think his price has gone up after getting traded. So we're in trouble. Anyhow, it is Malachi Hayes and Trevor Lines back with us. He's, sometimes he's in the car. Sometimes we don't even see him. Varying amounts of risks, sometimes 2, 1, 0. We don't know, but he's with us, and great to have you again. Great to see you again, Trevor. So let's kick off and talk about this trade deadline, because it was very active. It's worth noting Malachi Hayes, heroic today, writing up all 3 of our trade articles. Not like, I hope he wasn't sweating too many bullets. After all, the Dylan Cease one would have been quite a gulp, but hopefully stayed away from carpal tunnel, just writing up those 3, because they're sort of straightforward, and we'll get to all of them. But before we even get to the first, we're going to probably just go in chronological order. I'd like to ask both you, Trevor, and Malachi, just generally your impression of how Rick Hahn handled this trade deadline. I guess we can do a simple scale of better than you thought, about what you thought, or worse than you thought, but just impressions of what Rick did.
I would say, me personally, well, also thank you for welcoming me back on, Brett. It's been too long.
We're traded.
Yeah. Me personally, I would say, as far as activity level or who was being dealt, maybe about the same as I thought, or maybe I guess the Burger trade might be a little bit more active. But like you mentioned off the air, Rick Hahn has always been good at getting big returns on this portion of the GM job when it comes to trading away our major league talent for these minor league top prospects. He always seems to do a really good job of that. So I would say overall, a little bit better return than I was expecting. I personally would have liked to have seen them deal Cease as well. But I don't know what was out there as far as offers from some of these other teams. It just seemed like such a seller's market that he, for the most part, took pretty good advantage of.
Trevor, previewing the second half of our podcast here, where we will discuss those players not traded, including, of course, Dylan Cease. Seems to be a lot of consternation about that one. Now, in real time, I was able to witness, I think, at least a couple of Malachi's reactions to trades. So I'm guessing this is going to be a somewhat sunny response, but curious for confirmation. Malachi, your thoughts on basically how Rick handled this trade deadline?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm a little bit loath to give credit, just because, of course, he is the reason that they're in a large part of the reason they're in this mess to begin with. But I don't know if there are too many things that I would have handled differently. I was pleasantly surprised by the return that came back for Lucas Giolito. I thought that history told us that getting pretty much a consensus top 50, top 75 prospect for a rental player who's not a top of the rotation guy, as good as he is, I would not have put that in the realm of possibility. So I'll give him credit there. And like you said, Trevor, I personally would not have predicted a Jake Berger trade. Very sorry to see him go. And it actually, it is a little bit ironic that we get all these leaks from the front office about how, we have clubhouse issues. This is the players' problem, their attitude issues. There's no leadership. And then you go trade away the guy who might be the single most likable guy in that clubhouse. That being said, they couldn't keep him and Eloy and Andrew Vaughn on the same roster. And the fact that they got Jake Eder back, that's also Eder, I don't know how to pronounce it, but is again a little bit more than I would have anticipated. It was a seller's market. I would have liked them to see them trade Cease, given the returns that those players were getting, and given that his value probably doesn't go up all that much from here, unless he really goes on a tear to finish. But I also don't like making moves just for the sake of making moves. And if they really are dead set on trying to compete in 2024 and 2025, as realistic or not as it may be, if they're trying to do that, then there's nothing wrong with keeping Cease. So I'm not going to complain too much about that.
Okay. Let's kick off with the headliner trade. And still the biggest trade of all. There were many bigger names to be dealt, especially if Cease wasn't going anywhere. And that is the initial trade to the Angels, as Malachi alluded, a rental player, sort of I won't say stunning, but an impressive return. Because this wasn't just, okay, Angels 2 and 3 prospects. Okay, so what? It's the Angels. Their system's not good or whatever. We're talking about, a catcher, not just a top 50-ish or whatever prospect, but a catcher at that, coming back. And of course, Ronaldo's not just he's not just a throw-in. So to get a pretty decent and promising arm as well is not a shock, but still, this could have gone a lot worse. Thoughts from both of you on how this one played out?
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead, Malachi. All you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's tough. It's tough to see Lucas go, but like I said, I mean, that's the best, probably the best single player that's been traded for a rental in several years. I mean, you look at some of the other, there have been much better players, dealt to playoff hopeful teams over the past few years for very, very little returns, because teams don't like paying at the top of the market for those guys. But, Caro fills a need, and is also probably the best player they were going to get for somebody of Giolito's caliber, unless they were really going to try to, bid the Dodgers up to somebody like Diego Cartaya or someone else who they're not going to trade. So, assuming that he was going to be gone anyway, it's a good deal. There's no other way to look at it, I don't think. Same thing with Ronaldo, a free agent at the end of the year. The Sox don't have any use for high leverage bullpen guys, even if they throw 101. So, we don't know what other offers were out there, but the needs were filled. So, again, hard to complain.
Trevor, your thoughts?
I would agree with that. A different level. The other prospect you received from we didn't go when but
Trevor, we do have some mic issues going on with you. So we're going to move to the next trade while you maybe resolve that, and we're going to loop you back in. Just start yelling, and when I hear you very clear in your yelling, then I'll know you're back with us. So let's just move quickly to another catcher, Malachi. White Sox are collecting them, and it's no shock. I mean, the catching, I don't know, since we've been fans of the White Sox, probably. In fact, that is actually somewhat true. And certainly since we've been together here at Southside Sox, the catching prospects haven't been great. So the idea that the White Sox are targeting these types of players is not a shock. To flip Kendall Graveman into a guy who, is a first round pick. I don't think a lot of shine has, I don't think his shine has dimmed per se, but Corey Lee, what do you see in how that worked out?
Yeah, I said in the Slack a few days ago when there were rumors about Jonathan India, when he was rumored as the potential return for Lucas Giolito, and the Reds were shopping, that the Sox needed to take big swings. And that's one of the things about Edgar Carroll that excites me so much, is that a guy who's performing at Double-A at 20, 21 years old, they're not with a lot of variance, a guy who might not hit enough, to be a regular if he doesn't stay at catcher. Those are the kind of high risk, high rewards moves they need to make if they're not going to actually develop, an actual farm system infrastructure. So Corey Lee, from what I've seen, it seems like people are kind of split on him, but he's a major league catcher with a with a plus arm, and he's a guy who can field competently at the very least, and that's not something they've had very much of in recent years. And he's in the big leagues right now, more or less. I mean, not literally, but he will be. One has to assume he'll be up pretty much the moment that we get that Yasmani Grandal DFA notification, which one has to imagine is coming sooner rather than later. So I can't say I know a ton about Lee other than he hit for a substantial amount of power last year, albeit I believe in the Pacific Coast League, which is very, very power friendly to say the least. You see guys putting up a lot of inflated numbers there, but like you said at the start, Trevor, one thing Rick has always been good at is trading for name brand prospects. He likes the guys who are on the top of the list. They're not an organization that takes a bunch of 19-year-olds you've never heard of, and 4 years later they're in the big leagues pumping 99. So again, for Kendall Graveman, not just the fact that they have no use for a back-end reliever, but also you're getting that $8 million off the books. I would have taken that for a total nothing burger. So if you're getting a major league ready catcher who's at least possibly going to be a part-time player, probably good enough to be, an actual backup at least. Again, very, very hard to complain about that.
Yeah. An aspect of this Graveman thing, you are getting money off the books. You mentioned, you refer to Raylo as being some sort of luxury. Well, certainly Kendall Graveman being locked into that is a luxury as well. All right, we're going to give it a shot. You have an opportunity for a 2-for-1 now, Trevor, to talk Giolito trade and also Kendall Graveman trade. If we can hear you, let's give it a test.
All right.
I don't know. Still fingers crossed. The fingers crossed did not work. So I don't know what to do on your end with the audio, but you are still cutting in and out. So
try without the AirPods, maybe. It's a lot of crackling. I don't know.
Yeah, we're getting a crackle issue. I'm sorry about that. Rain Delay Theater beginning here on the Dugout Metrics Podcast. While Trevor adjusts, I will throw my 2 cents in. I will say that I was probably at least slightly pleasantly surprised at the returns. I don't know what I was expecting, knowing that this, as Trevor said right off, that this is the strength. If there's a strength of Rick Hahn, that he, comes through in this way. And I mean, I think he has. I think enough credit due. Under the umbrella of why are we here? It's 2023. How in the world are we talking about selling? But we don't really have to say that in this podcast, I don't think. That's a given that we should not be having this discussion. We should be talking about acquisitions made by a playoff contending or aspiring team, not the opposite. So that part is sickening. So that's the premise here. We already know, we've already gone past that because we could just complain. And I think every podcast has actually complained about why we're not in the position to contend now for probably a year and a half. So that said, okay, now we got to do what we can to scrape ourselves back up closer. Trevor, we will give you another try to discuss trades at some point because after all, that's what we have signed you for. So let's give it a shot. Yes, you can.
Okay. Awesome.
All right.
Maybe it was the AirPods.
You're back.
Basically, the Corey Lee at minimum is likely going to be a good bridge to Kiro during this time. Kind of see what you have there. Like Malachi said, it's going to be a good catcher.
This is absolutely crazy, Trevor. We heard you for a moment, and now the same thing is happening. And so I'm very sorry. I know this is frustrating with the technical difficulties, but we did hear you for about 3 sentences, and then
shoot,
the same sort of thing happened.
Now you're back.
Okay. I guess whenever I get talking, it starts cutting out. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's some kind of crackling that takes over and cuts you out. It doesn't seem to be there anymore.
I'll just start interrupting you, and when I interrupt you, Trevor, you'll know. Okay, I gotta let the system cool down.
Okay. But yeah, it'll be a good bridge to Kiro at minimum. He's got some power. We'll see what the back can do. And Kiro, like I was trying to mention, I think that's on another level compared to any other prospect that we received in any of these deals. A 20-year-old started the season at age 19 in AA. For reference, Colson Montgomery, who absolutely put himself on the map last year, that was his age 19 and 20 season. He just got up to AA at the very end of that stellar year and struggled in AA. Versus Kiro, in that same season, age-wise, he started the season in AA and is putting up a league average line offensively. Defensively, seems to be fringy, whether he can stick behind the plate. By all accounts, his framing hasn't been graded as very good so far. But A, you can work on that. And B, who knows, by the time he gets to the big leagues, the challenge system may be in place already. I mean, might not really even be a big part of it. Yeah. I just saw him throw someone out on Twitter today. So if he's got a decent enough arm and the framing doesn't really matter anymore, then and the bat plays, we could have a star on our hand.
It's about time Rick Hahn is ahead of the game. So let's just say Rick Hahn's ahead of the game, and he knows framing don't matter anymore. No more James McCanns. All right, let's move to our next trade, which is I find a delightful one, and it's with the Dodgers. I don't know. I guess we thought Giolito was headed to the Dodgers. Instead, the Dodgers took on Lance Lynn, and now I finally realize why we had to trade Luke Smailes and why he did not show up to this podcast is because we're going to call him on the carpet about Joe Kelly. I love you, Luke. Please come back. But yeah, now we can all just bag on Joe Kelly. Anyhow, those two veterans who I'm sure will both throw 110 miles an hour in their first outings. I think Joe Kelly already has. But for a couple, I mean, Tracy Thompson, okay, but a couple arms who I think, people might be sleeping on a little bit. I'm pretty impressed with this return again, given the fact that we shouldn't be trading our frontline guys because they should be better players. But you two and your thoughts on this Dodgers trade.
To me, these two guys are like your classic Dodger prototype pitchers. They're the guys with the big high spin fastballs, and the Dodgers have been really good at developing those pitchers into being able to command them a little bit better and polish them off a little bit more. So we'll see what the White Sox can do with it. Historically, that hasn't really been a strength, but they have the big fastballs that I mentioned. They have big stuff, and it's just with both of them, probably Nastrini more than Leisure. It's going to be a question of whether they can start to polish that off with some other pitches and start to command those pitches better, throw enough strikes to stick as a starter. Leisure at this point is most likely topping out as a back-end reliever at best. But both of them, like I said, the big fastball is kind of the calling card, it seems like.
Yeah, Leisure. Believe me, we'll learn to pronounce all of your names, spell them all correctly, get the correct diacritics ASAP. But he's already in AAA. I mean, he's a guy who I thought when they acquired him could even see the South Side this summer. Not that we need to rush these guys up, but well, that's also what the White Sox do. Malachi, your thoughts on the Dodgers trade?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty small sample, but you can definitely see a bit of an MO in terms of the type of pitching prospects that Rick was looking for and Rick was targeting. I think Kai Bush kind of falls into a similar category. He doesn't have the big velocity that Nastrini or Leisure, who has huge velocity, does, but they're throwing a lot of shit at the wall. It's, take 3 or 4 pitchers who, maybe have a 20 or 30% shot of being starters in the big leagues. Got to develop a third pitch, got to throw enough strikes. got to do all this stuff. And, if one of them sticks and you get a 2 or 3 starter out of this deadline, great. That's a pretty good job, honestly. This one, the Nastrini leisure combination, and it makes me a little bit more nervous because, like you said, Trevor, Nastrini is just a classic Dodgers pick. He had like thoracic outlet, I want to say, in high school. I'm not sure if he's had TJ, but I don't think he pitched a ton in college, and he's a guy who the Dodgers molded him essentially. I mean, he wouldn't have been, if he had been able to put all this stuff together himself, he would have been gone a lot higher than the end of the 4th round when he did. And whether the White Sox can continue that developmental path, the results haven't totally been there the last year or two for Nastrini. He's running ERA around 4 with big strikeout numbers and walk numbers. And, whether the Sox are the team that can get him to finished product mode, that makes me a little bit more nervous than in the situation with someone like, Kiro, where if you're a good enough hitter, you're going to hit in the big leagues probably. And pitching is, requires a lot more of right place, right time, right coaches, because there's a lot of guys with good stuff out there. So for a guy who had a 6.5 ERA and Joe Kelly, it's a, very solid return. But as one would imagine from the guys being traded there, there's a reason the Dodgers were comfortable trading them for a guy with a 6.5 ERA.
Yeah. Malachi brings up a good point, and that is you do have to factor in the White Sox coefficient, which is you take the 80 grade prospect and you got to throw that multiplier in, which takes them down to, I don't know, a 55 or 60, which is unfortunate, but that is the reality. So you got to aim high for your Rick Hahn. Okay, moving on to trades from today, and Malachi is very intimately familiar with these because he carried the mail for us today and writing these up. First, I believe, is the one shocker, I suppose, the one shocker, if you want to call trading a DH and an affable DH a shocker. But Jake for Jake, you sort of got to like the arm coming back, especially given the fact that there's only so much room. I mean, he's starting at second base, but however, he should not be starting at second base. So again, we got to do the White Sox coefficient there. But seems to be, surprise or not, a decent cash out of a guy having an oddly Joey Gallo historic type season. Thoughts on this strange Jake Drake trade from you two? Oh, Trevor, you're muted now. We are anxiously awaiting what Trevor has to say, but now he is muted himself. All right, there.
No.
Okay, we're gonna kick it back to Malachi and then just scream, just keep screaming, and when we hear you scream, we'll know to kick it back to Trevor. But you wrote this one up, Malachi, and I'm sure you expressed yourself well in that piece, but summarize for us for folks who do not want to read and instead just want to listen.
Yeah, this is pure roster math on both ends. There's, Jake Burger is a good hitter, but he's ultimately a one-dimensional hitter, and there's not a lot that he does realistically that you can't get from, Eloy Jimenez at least, and like it or not, you're invested in Andrew Vaughn, and his upside is a much better hitter than what Jake Burger's giving you right now. They're playing him at second base. I mean, you just can't. There's just no room, and you got guys like Lenine Sosa, rotting down in AAA, where you need to see, what you can get out of him these last couple months, and on the other hand, you have the Marlins, who are pretty bloody rich in pitching, and don't necessarily need a guy like Eder, who I personally loved coming out of Vandy. There's a lot of pedigree there, and if you're a left-hander and you can run it up to 95, 96 as a starter with any kind of consistency, you will stick as a starter in the big league. So he's got a pretty decent slider, and the reports, I haven't seen anything since, but from what I've read, when he was it seemed to be developing a nice feel for a changeup before he went down with Tommy John a couple years ago. So he's a guy who might have the highest ceiling of anybody does have the highest ceiling of anybody they acquired on the pitching side. And, at the end of the day, if you can get a potential 2-3 starter for a relatively one-dimensional, not even a 3 true outcomes hitter, he's a 2 outcome hitter because he doesn't walk all that much. And, I love him and I wish him well, but it's a very, very thin line with hitters between, being a solid DH and being out of the league because you can't hit 190 and you're not hitting enough to make up for it, So that's selling high. And I'm a little surprised they pulled the trigger on that, but it was a need for a need. It was good roster math. And I'm pretty glad they got this one done. I'm a lot less about Lenine Sosa and Jose Rodriguez and AA and AAA now, because watching their numbers pile up while we have the major league roster constructed as we do is just infuriating.
Yeah, and as alluded to at the top, clearly with decisions made, even last year with roster construction, clearly having good guys, good personalities, potential leaders in this clubhouse right now is not of top importance to the White Sox. So shedding Jake Burger, who does seem to provide just a little bit of levity, a little bit of joy of the game, forced into this roster just doesn't seem to matter right now to the White Sox, however much it should. Trevor, you are back, and we're hoping to hear from you. Thoughts on the Jake for Jake?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. Like I mentioned off the top, I wasn't expecting Burger to get dealt, but it does make a lot of sense. They have a guy in Eloy, they have a guy in Vaughn that they really are kind of positionless guys that aren't really contributing much on the defensive end. And Burger was another one of those guys, despite being the one of the three of those that was really producing the most at the plate, especially power-wise. But then you also have Moncada, who's tied up with one of the worst contracts in baseball for what we've gotten out of him. It would be nice if you could just hand the keys to third base over to Burger, but with Moncada there's really no way to do that. So you're getting back a solid back end of the top 100 type prospect. He jumped up on Baseball America's midseason rankings a little bit. He was the number 2 prospect in the Marlins system. I saw a lot of people originally kind of looking at the MLB Pipeline preseason rankings, and he was number 9 in the Marlins system, and kind of wondering, especially when you are trading away a fan favorite, you're going to get a little pushback. But it seems like a good prospect. Just reading up on him a little bit, the guys at Fangraphs had him as the 54 ranked prospect in baseball in their May update. And his stuff, once he got back out on the mound, seems to have ticked down a little bit since then. Obviously, he's coming off Tommy John's, but Tommy John lost a couple miles an hour, and his arm angle dropped a little bit, which has also created a little less ride on his fastball, according to those guys. So we'll see if the White Sox can kind of get that back. Based on some video that I watched, he looked like his slider was kind of his out pitch, especially to left-handed hitters. Really good slider from the left side that he got maybe 7 strikeouts on in one outing out of 8 or 9 total. So that pitch seems to still be there. It's probably going to be a matter of if the fastball is able to kind of play enough in the big leagues or take a step forward.
And let's wind it up with sort of a combo of the final 2 transactions today, which one is just sending money to the Rays, who in a 180-degree contrast to the White Sox are just bursting with so many players that, as Malachi pointed out, rather than just have to let this guy go for free or whatever the waiver claim fee might be going back to a team, actually sold to whatever undisclosed amount to the White Sox of Luis Patino. And then, of course, Keenan Middleton, sort of out of nowhere, actually really short of just the last few outings for him, having beyond a good, but a dynamite relief season, flipping him to the last place Yankees, who, strangely enough, are still very much in the thick of the playoff hunt. Send him to the last place. I'm going to keep saying last place Yankees. It makes me happy. For a high A arm who's actually sort of intriguing as well. Thoughts on Juan Corella, Luis Patino, or just the idea that the Sox are stockpiling arms that just haven't really been able to draft and keep consistently, because some of the brightest names in the system have taken steps back or been injured this year. So White Sox do just need to keep calling more arms in.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they need to take big swings, and these are the kind of moves they need to be make. I mean, Keenan Middleton was about to be a free agent. Juan Carrella is nothing of note. I think the only prospect list he appeared on was in the back end of the Yankees top 30 in the MLB pipeline list, which also hasn't been updated since February or March or whenever. But there were some, whispers about him being a potential guy last year. He had some nice numbers. He's got some nice stuff, and he's in A-ball right now, so he's 21 years old. So God knows what happens. But if you're getting that for a guy who you signed to a minor league contract in May, then that's just fine. I am personally pretty excited about picking up Luis Patino for basically nothing. I mean, there's a little bit of prospect luster still there. His stuff has definitely ticked down a bit since he's been hurt for a couple years. But again, those are the kind of risks that the Sox need to take. One of the reasons they're in this position here is that you see all the time got teams like the Dodgers and the Rays and the model organizations are picking up the fringe 40-man guys from other teams who are kind of getting pushed off rosters, who they see something in, and then they turn them into something. The White Sox don't really make a lot of those moves. They're not claiming players on waivers. They're not mostly, picking up players for cash considerations. They're usually the team trading players for cash consideration. So, taking a flyer on a guy like Patino and getting Keenan Middleton for something that you essentially paid nothing for and weren't going to get any use out of the rest of the year. Those are fine moves. Are they likely to be difference makers at any point in the future? Probably not. But those are the darts you need to throw when you're an organization that doesn't develop particularly well. So it's it is the same process essentially that got them Gregory Santos. Patino is probably not a guy who's getting traded for cash considerations if he's on most organizations, most other teams, but the Rays are just so good at developing players. They are kind of in this constant state of 40-man roster crunch. And, if they had designated him for assignment, he almost certainly would have been claimed on waivers. So again, credit where it's due. Rick jumped the market on that and hopefully get something out of it. It worked. It worked with Santos. So.
And see, Malachi, we complained for years about the White Sox trading their international money, just trading away instead of using it. We'll see now. Rick he's reclaiming some of his international money. He's taking it in a very strange way. He just wants to see things play out a little bit more. He wants to feel a little bit more secure, and then he'll give the money for the international prospects. So, again, maybe he's just one step ahead of us, or maybe he's one step out the door as GM, but that's a whole nother different podcast. Trevor, these sort of like, just sort of finishing up, dotting some I's, moves though, but you echo the fact that just bringing in arms is what's necessary here at the White Sox.
Yeah, I don't know who to give credit to. I forget who it was on Twitter that I saw today, but I was cracking up. Someone said after the Patino move, now I finally know what Rick Hahn meant when he said the money will be spent. And I couldn't believe it. That was creative, whoever that was, getting Patino for cash. Missed out on Bryce Harper, but hey. If the roles were reversed and Patino was getting claimed or getting picked up or traded for cash from the White Sox to the Rays, you could pencil him in for a 3 ERA out of the bullpen for him. But vice versa, like Malachi said, we're not giving anything up. So it's a nice dart throw. I don't really have the highest of hopes for it working out. I watched one of Juan Carrella's starts on YouTube, just kind of a sped up version of it. It looked like 60 to 70% sliders. He's put up good numbers the past couple of years, and he has a high spin breaking ball. That's kind of his calling card. Probably one of those guys that's more of a supinator, kind of gets around the ball and probably doesn't have the best carry to his fastball, but can really spin it. So, I could see him ending up as a piece in the future as someone out of the pen. You get those guys out of the pen that are flipping in 70% sliders, but the slider's so good that it still plays. I think that's kind of the ceiling that we're hoping for out of this, but we'll see. Who knows? He's put up some pretty good numbers for the Yankees in the minors.
Let me translate the front part of what Trevor said, because that's my job here, not to actually provide insight, but to translate. And what Trevor's saying is, if you have Jake Diekman, you don't really need a Luis Patino any longer. So, I mean, let's face it, Rays are just, they're just making their choices. They're making their moves. Hey, we're going to take a break. We're going to talk about some trades maybe that weren't made. Talk a little bit more about Rick Hahn. We'll talk about some stuff. We'll talk about Luke Smailes, whether we're going to be able to attract him back to Dugout Metrics. But give us a minute. Fans First Sports Network is going to sell you something. Please consider buying it because I'm sure it's good stuff. Slap chop, something cool, a mop or something, or I don't know, probably gambling. All right, just listen to it. Sorry, I got no choice. On YouTube, it'll just be like this. We'll be right back. Okay, so hold on for a minute. We'll be back. Hey, White Sox fans, it is Dugout Metrics number 8. I'm Brett Ballantini, your host. And it's been a while. I think if you listen to the first part, I don't know why you skipped to the second part. So you obviously listened to the first part, but somehow you didn't because the first part's boring because I'm talking or whatever. Okay, well. Well, yeah, exactly. Come on, now Trevor's with us. We're feeling really confident we can hear him. So
mic under control.
Yes, the mic situation. Yes. I mean, again, we're just out of practice here with Dugout Metrics. It's been like a couple of years. So let me just review the premise. The premise is, and this was back in the Luke Smailes days when he was back on our team. We're trying right now. As we're doing this podcast, I am texting contract negotiations with him. So we do hope to have him back within just a couple of days, getting right back in the fold. But with the case of both Trevor and Luke, guys who had just, Luke might have been even just winding up his actual playing career as he was starting with us, but certainly was fresh from playing at left field, middle infielder Trevor Lyons. So the premise was both of these guys were sort of analytical writers, had written up really great stuff. I think in both cases, at least Trevor's case, I think I saw some fan post type of thing. I was like, hey, wait a minute, why is this in the fan post? This needs to be in the big boy post. So let's get you up above the fold. And so we did that. The premise here then, of course, is guys who played, guys who also sort of are taking that analytical approach to the game as well, sort of marrying that. And again, I think even the initial pitch I made with Trevor and Luke was, hey, you guys have played. That's why we're going to call it dugout because you're in the dugout. You're dodging, I guess, not tobacco stains anymore. You can't chew tobacco in college, can you? And the great news is here, like 2 years later, because, we finally, in an allusion to Rick Hahn, we finally have more money. And trust me, when I get the money, I spend it immediately. We don't sit on any money here at Southside Sox and Sox Populi. So, of course, got to go out. We need pitching. So I got to go out, get some pitching. So, we are celebrating the addition of Malachi Hayes. We got to get we do have to get his shoulder back in shape. We got to stretch him out. I think he's good for a batter or two right now. We got to stretch him out because we got nobody. I can't do it. So, but we'll talk about that again. That's post podcast stuff. But let's jump back into it and talk about what didn't happen. It seemed like the drumbeat of trading Dylan Cease grew louder and louder. I guess part of that is fair because people saw that, okay, the White Sox are rebuilding, reloading, whatever. We're looking between, we're not even looking at the lines of what Rick Hahn's saying. We're seeing the roster ourselves and saying, okay, this is looking at least like some sort of mini rebuild. I guess you can try to call it a restock. And the guys they're getting aren't like in the DSL or low A. So, okay, I guess we can buy the restock to a degree. So I imagine that would whet appetite for Dylan Cease to be moved as well, because it does seem like he might have a lonely year as the only starter on the White Sox next year. But at the same time, he's still controllable. He's still a young guy. He's coming off of a 6 WAR season. People are talking about it being a seller's market. And, okay, but I mean, he personally is not at his height as a pitcher. So beginning with Dylan Cease, we'll talk about a couple other names as well, but beginning with Dylan Cease, I think both of you have already admitted you're perhaps maybe a little surprised he wasn't moved or it didn't get a little bit more serious, but thoughts about Dylan sticking? Should he have gone? Were you really convinced he should be gone?
This is a scenario where, when you're talking about 2.5 years of team control left, you don't make a deal just for the sake of making a deal. Like I said earlier, especially if they do have actual designs on competing next year. If we get to a similar position a year from now where they're also out of contention and a deal isn't being made, then you're kind of like, okay, what are we doing here? Based on the reports and, the news that was leaking out, it really seemed like this was just a game of Rick Hahn playing chicken with Mike Elias and the Baltimore Orioles. And they love their prospects, as much as, fans love to bandied about Jackson Holliday was even if a trade got made, Jackson Holliday was never going to be involved in that. it is a little surprising given the needs of some teams like Baltimore and Cincinnati, who are pretty loaded with hitting prospects at the very least, kind of standing pat. And Jack Flaherty is nice, but if he's your playoff number one starter, then you're probably not playing a second round. So if they weren't going to meet the asking price on Dylan Cease, this is still the guy who finished second in Cy Young voting last year, and if you trade him just for the sake of trading him for an underwhelming package, and then he goes out and has another Cy Young year next year while you're trying to compete, it's a bad look, and it's not a risk worth taking unless you're really, sure of what you're getting, because you're trading a very good pitcher who's going to be around for a couple of years. So it's, again, this is kind of situation where if Rick had his price, I think you said this earlier in the Slack, Brett, if Rick had his price and it wasn't met, then so be it. If there's one thing Rick Hahn is good at, it is getting face value for his stars. So if he felt like that deal wasn't worth making, probably wasn't worth making. As much as I, again, hate to act like they really have earned the benefit of the doubt here, but it's not something I'm stressing over.
Okay. Rick Hahn fanboy Malachi Hayes just pitched that one to you, Trevor. So take a swing, and your thoughts on Dylan Cease remaining a White Sox player.
Yeah, I would have loved to have gotten something done with the Orioles. They are just absolutely loaded. I'm guessing that from some of the stuff I heard, it sounded like maybe Cowser is who Hahn really wanted, and maybe one or two other of their top guys. And Elias wasn't willing to meet that asking price, which he's been known to be stingy with prospects. And if I was an Orioles fan, like we were talking about, I would have been very underwhelmed. And as someone who put a preseason bet on the Orioles to win the World Series, I was very underwhelmed. A little bit more there. But I would have been even happy if we didn't get Cowser, but got maybe three of their top 7 or 8 guys. I would have been more than happy to pull the trigger on that. But we're all speculating. No one really knows what the talkings were around. And I had heard rumblings that the Dodgers may have been making a push for it to happen. I even heard the Diamondbacks, which I would have loved to have gotten my college teammate Brandon Pfaadt on the White Sox, but I think it would have taken maybe him and Lawler, and that was never going to happen. So I'm guessing just no one met Hahn's asking price, and he didn't really have a reason to I guess call their bluff. So nothing ended up happening, and I guess we'll revisit at the winter meetings.
Yeah, it's still just a 26-man roster. It's great to have those prospects, but they aren't going to help you in October, and that's not an excuse to clear the cupboard. Just to go after Dylan Cease and his 2 WAR or whatever in his down year. But it's interesting that of several teams, we're not just focused. I mean, Orioles was the focus, but you both ran out 3, 4, 5 other teams. I mean, this was a competitive market unless we find out that Rick Hahn pulled a Mike Rizzo and just kept moving the bar and said, "Oh, okay, you agreed to." Well, now I've decided I want another guy. I want one more guy. But I don't think that's the way Rick Hahn. Again, not to be fanboy myself either, but I don't think he necessarily plays that way, because when people do it to you and you don't like it, you shouldn't do it to other people. But it'll be interesting to get maybe some stories. It would be interesting to have a tangible offer that was rejected by the White Sox. Not that necessarily will ever come out in a way that we can trust, but it would be pretty interesting to find out, because then some of the caterwauling over the fact that Dylan Cease is still in the White Sox makes a little bit more sense. If it's a great package that Rick passed up just because he thinks now he can just extort. Something tells me, he just didn't have his price met. As alluded to in this little ticker thing, there are a couple names that came up. We mentioned Yasmani, immovable, our redacted starter, who might also just in a more of a moral sense be immovable, but with 30 Major League 29 other Major League Baseball teams, I doubt it. Really, even Eloy, who knows? Were there players on the White Sox who didn't get moved that you thought there'd be more talk about, or who might even have gotten moved and didn't?
I'm sure there was some interest in Aaron Bummer. I guess that maybe lends some credence to what Hahn is saying, that they're planning on competing in 2024. I don't know how they're planning on doing that with Jerry Reinsdorf as the owner. But I would have thought that, if we are going full sail rebuild and look to 2025, which is what I would do, you would think some of those guys like an Aaron Bummer might have been a great trade target for one of these contending teams that need some bullpen help, especially the more analytical minded teams that are going to look past the surface stats.
Yeah. And you'd be saving some pennies in the couch cushions there, because he's not paid a lot, but he's also not paid minimum like basically 90% of the team is now. So I guess that is surprising. Malachi, other names that may have not popped up?
Yeah, I can't say I'm terribly surprised at anybody who didn't move with what you guys, to add on to what you all just said about Cease. I think there might have been some, and this probably goes for other players who weren't traded as well. I think there were some possible just like fit issues with the teams that were the likely targets. If you're going to trade Cease, you need to get a major league ready pitcher back, and probably a fairly good one. And none of the teams, with the exception of maybe the Dodgers, who have about 15 pitching injuries themselves, really had the ammo to make that happen on top of what else on the position side they were going to ask for. There was a lot of smoke around Tim Anderson that wound up not coming to fruition. I personally was just never buying that at all. They have been pretty, you can, whether we believe it or not, the reports about trying to compete for next year have been pretty constant through the entire trade system. And if you're trying to compete next year, trading Tim Anderson at a low point in his value with a $14 million option next year, and Colson Montgomery still probably at least 2 years away, just never made any sense. You could take offers on Eloy. You're probably not going to get anything that's going to make it worth trading his upside. Bummer, a similar thing where you're selling at a low point in his value, where there's a lot of teams that are going to both look at the FIP and look at how he pitches, and look at the last gestures at however many years of White Sox infield defense, and say that's a guy who is just waiting to put up a 170 ERA on a 75% ground ball rate. But again, when you got a 650 ERA, there's only a few teams who are going to, trade anything of substance to take on that risk. So that's not, again, I'm not super surprised that there wasn't much moving there. I don't know. I take it at face value that they're actually going to try to compete next year. I mean, they could compete if they want to go and spend $75 million on free agents. Like you said, is that going to happen? God only knows, probably not. But they have been pretty constant on saying that they are going to try one way or another. And I don't see too many other players on the roster who were not moved that are going to do it. I mean, there are reports that they shopped Clevenger and there was no interest whatsoever. The unfortunate thing is that in professional sports, if you're good enough, you can get away with a lot of shit. It seems like that nobody wants to take on that baggage or had any remote interest. I mean, we didn't even hear any whispers about that. So again, not terribly surprising. I don't think. And Grandal is a sunk cost. Why would you trade him when he's going to be DFA in a week? Why would you give up? So
yeah. And let's not forget Tim Anderson. As much as we may have legitimate fears that he's fallen off a cliff, that this could be it for him at 30. This is the first year he's just not. I mean, the White Sox have enjoyed an enormous surplus value from Tim Anderson, and even this year, it wouldn't have taken a typical year for him to pretty much warrant him being paid, being on the roster. The idea that there's no chance of him coming back during this compete in 2024 season and not warrant even the $14 million option is. I mean, that's a stretch. I mean, if he's done, he's done. But I mean, you'd probably have to say chances are he's not, and therefore he would warrant the pay, warrant being on the team, warrant being a leader or not in Steve Stone's eyes, whatever.
Boy, it's just shocking that a guy whose carrying tool is incredible contact ability and back control suddenly falls off a cliff when he spends 2 months playing with a clearly injured shoulder. Shocking.
Fair
and of
point.
course, he's hitting like 350 since the All-Star break. So yeah, he'll be on the team next year, and I'm pretty glad for it personally. I don't think you're not getting any better options for $14 million.
Yeah. And Trevor, not to keep playing up the fact that you are still waiting to be 100% and be able to swing that bat again, but to be honest, and hopefully to make light of what's been a challenging situation for you, this might be your last chance to see actual time with the White Sox. They really love the one-armed guys, or the one-shouldered guys. So it might be, if they're having any sort of just like a showcase, while you're taking a little time off, consider it, because it really is becoming, unfortunately, characteristic of this team to run guys out hurt, to not IL them with any sort of haste or urgency or accuracy or paying attention to the games on the field. So, I hate that that's your opening, but, when it's there, you take it. So,
yeah, I don't know if anyone had the ability to empathize. There we go. Empathize as much with Luis Robert last year when they were forcing him to go out there with the left wrist injury, as I did. I was like, you cannot swing a bat like that. Mm-hmm. And clearly he couldn't. But Alex Kirilloff with the Twins, same exact procedure that I'm probably going to be having. So he has had a little bit of a breakout. I think he was the AL Player of the Month this past month. So, hey, that gives me some hope. I DM'd him on Instagram, asked him about his recovery process. No response. So,
he knows you're a Sox fan. I mean, come on, you're a Sox fan. He's not gonna.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Jeez. That's it. Just give me another reason to hate the Twins.
Well, the 29 other teams will be interested in you once you're patched up. I'm afraid to say, Trevor, the White Sox, your time is patched. The White Sox will not be, because you will pass your physical. So, That's unfortunately a no-go. And then to think, guys, not that we want to get into a whole nother podcast, but then to think just 6 months later, your brand new manager whose greatest skill is communication is calling you out for not hustling, calling you out while you're being hurt, to the point where you're calling up to the press box to report that you're benching Luis Robert because he's dogging it. Boy, this organization. Okay. Let's get back to Rick Hahn, because we know all three of us are fanboys at this point. But to circle back and ask the question that I asked at the top in a different way, give me a grade for Rick Hahn, 1 to 10. How do you think he did with what he did? Not what he could have done, or not. Let's not penalize him for the fact that we shouldn't be talking about selling, because then he gets a negative 58. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how did he do? Trevor, tell me first.
It's just tough, because ideally, from someone from the outside looking in, if you were to come in there as GM right now, I think, as I mentioned, that the best move is to clean house and to reset for 2025. As someone in Rick Hahn's position who's already been through a complete disaster of a rebuild, you don't know. I'm guessing, I would hope that he feels like there's a little heat on his seat. And so if I'm in his shoes, I may be in that ballpark where I have to kind of try to compete in 2024. So I can see where he's coming from with not doing the full scale rebuild, even though I do think it's an uphill battle. And as I mentioned, with the rental type guys that he was able to sell for the most part, that is what he excels at typically. And I think he got good value for him.
So low marks, because he doesn't, even he may not have the job security to do actually the proper thing, but given the restrictions that I guess he gave himself and maybe Jerry, because Jerry doesn't want to do a rebuild because he's almost dead or whatever. But based on that, he's what, like a 7 or 8 or something out of 10 that, he acquitted himself pretty well.
Yeah. I would say this deadline, I'd give it probably a 6 to 7 out of 10.
All right. Okay. Trevor's not giving it away. He's back, but he's not giving it away. Okay. Malachi, any sunnier than that? What's your thought about how it all?
Yeah, I was going to go somewhere around like a 7.5. There's nothing spectacular there, especially since the Sox don't have the kind of, organizational structure where you can look at a guy and say, oh, he's got these traits. I'm sure they'll coach him up in this and he'll be in the big leagues in a couple of years. That being said, you take moves like getting a legitimate major league catcher for Kendall Graveman, who was going to provide absolutely nothing in the way of surplus value, nor did they need it. That's a good move. I think if you have the Dodgers, giving up some of their better prospects who they can, afford to lose for somebody like Lance Lynn, whose performance is just not there. I'll give him credit for doing that, and getting some high upside lottery tickets in Corella and Patino. It's really nothing spectacular, and there's not a lot of acute hope in the sense that you could point to the guy and say, I really like what they got in this guy. I think they'll do this with them. But given the cards that he dealt himself, I think he played them. I think he played them fairly well. There's quite a few fan bases out there, both buying and selling, who are very viscerally displeased with their front offices, activity or lack thereof. But it was a seller's market, and I think a lot of it's going to depend on the moves they make over the next 7-8 months or so. But I think Hahn played his cards pretty well.
Mm-hmm. So this is his high point. It's only going to go down from here, because if we're waiting on the next 6 or 7 months, we know it's not going to get better. We know it's probably going to get a lot worse. And don't you dare bring Redacted back for next year. Okay. Speed rounds with Rick Hahn are pretty fun. And I believe the last one we had was asking folks to predict, and we did this in a couple different phases, and Malachi ended up being the only one who agreed with me. And that, of course, was whether or not Rick Hahn would get better than a mid-40s pick, like the draft pick, the qualifying offer draft pick would be next year if he just didn't trade Lucas Giolito. Would he do better in trade? Would he get more than that, or would it be just best if he didn't do a thing, kept his hands tied, and just took that pick? I think it's turned out pretty clearly he did better than that. Malachi did agree with me in a subsequent podcast. So we clearly are the two geniuses of Southside Sox. No offense to Trevor, but yet he can be the third genius. We're all here now, and we're on Dugout Metrics. This is where we're supposed to be. This is where the high IQ people at the Fans First Sports Network hang out. But let's do another one, which is going to be a lot less concrete, and it's probably going to be more hopeful. But we did get some comments coming right out of the trade deadline, and let's face it, the earlier comments from Rick were a little crabby. He was a little short-tempered when talking about the initial batch of picks, the Carroll trade, the trade with also Houston, I think. He was a little prickly. I'm not sure if prickly was what he was today, but there was at least some hope among our staff discussion that there were some signals that perhaps he didn't think he was maybe necessarily going to be around. I would never read that into Rick Hahn, but I will say, is there any chance, whether signaled by what he had to say today or his tone, or just his track record, that Rick Hahn, because we know Jerry will not do anything to him, he'll only promote him. Is there any chance? Give me the odds. Give me the chance. A good time to put in another betting plug. Trevor, give me the odds of Rick Hahn actually recognizing at the end of the season, I really blew this, and stepping away and actually resigning his position. Give me some odds, guys.
I think the odds are slim that he gets completely fired, and I think, less than 1 in 100 that he steps down of his own accord. I really think. I don't know. I don't see it at all. That's the first I've heard anyone bring it up, and that would be shocking. But I don't know. Less than 1 in 100.
Can you give me any more hope, Malachi?
I mean, he ain't getting fired, and he's not stepping down of his own accord. But I have a stronger feeling than I did before his comments today that he may be getting the John Paxson treatment of being somewhat unceremoniously shoved to a different part of the organization, reassigned. I don't think Kenny Williams is going anywhere. But I'm starting to think they might at the very least get a fresh face to be the fall guy. Moving forward, it's I don't know remember what his comments today were verbatim, but it was essentially along the lines of as far as other moves within the organization, we don't do that in season. We'll see what happens. And that to me sounds like a guy who's not super duper confident in the current organizational structure remaining in place past the end of the year. And the one thing that I think is worth noting to that regard is that, Jerry Reinsdorf owns the Bulls as well as the Sox. And the reason I say, of course, get the John Paxson treatment is that he had a very similar situation where Paxson was essentially allowed to run the Bulls into the ground. And it was the case for quite a few years before he finally was punted somewhere in the organization so they could bring in someone else. And that happened when they stopped selling out games. The Bulls were an automatic sellout for 20 plus years. And after 15 years, the Jordan effect wore off and they were bad. And the United Center was half empty every night. And it's a little bit different in baseball because attendance is a lot more untied to revenue than it used to be. But the Sox keep all of the ticket and concession and parking money. And you know what? They have lost 3 times as many fans this year in terms of paid attendance as any other team in baseball. Their attendance is down 180,000 from where it was this time last year. That's about 3,500 fans per game. And that's not an insignificant amount of lost revenue for a team that is always crying about barely breaking even and stuff like that. So if we're following history, if there's anything that moves the needle for Jerry, it's stuff like that. And this time it wasn't intentional. When you were selling Chris Sale and doing all that stuff after 2016, you could have imagined attendance was plummet. That was not supposed to be happening right now. They're supposed to be selling out games right now. And yeah, like I said, if anything moves the needle with Jerry, it's that. So if we're going to give odds, I'd say maybe 40-50% in my mind that Rick Hahn is not the GM after this year, whatever capacity that looks like.
All right. I'm it's not just wishful. I would say this signals as much as up until today, even we all would have said it's a 0% chance. I would say that tone indicates to me that he might actually be tired of this. He might actually realize he's failed. And I understand it's like that, that Ivy League bravado or whatever, or that, law school bravado or whatever it is, it's tough to penetrate, but there's been a lot of messaging that would perhaps maybe erode whatever shield you're using. I'm going to say it's a 20% chance that he is going to be actually resigning or getting out of Dodge just because he's tired of it. And that coincides with what Malachi's saying, and that, there is probably at this point, there's cause to pivot, probably not go fresh. I still think probably the next GM is named Ken Williams. It's just probably a junior at the end of the name. But anyway, those are other podcasts for the future. This is Dugout Metrics. We have taxed Trevor Lyons for an entire hour. And of course, he taxed his technology like right off the bat. So we got to get that bristled up, really good out for next time. But we have worked him.
Putting myself on mute. I think when I put myself on mute, that was what was causing it. Because ever since then, I've been okay. I don't know.
See? All right. Well, and we like the atmospheric noises. Don't worry about that. Dogs barking, sirens blaring, whatever, or perfect silence. But listen, the point is, we've taxed him so much that we cannot possibly ask him back for the next Dugout Metrics. He has earned himself a nice break, so we're giving him. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty good gig. I mean, you come on one podcast and then you get a vacation. He gets a vacation, but hopefully, I say this every time we do Dugout Metrics, hopefully the next Dugout Metrics with Trevor Lyons is sooner than later, and that before the season ends, we're going to have another one together, whether it's the core 4, whether I invite someone else, we find other people just sitting in the dugout doing analytics and like, hey, come on, join us, whatever. Malachi said it wasn't too scary, so come on, it'll be fine. There's room on the bench. But again, you've earned the break. So I know this was taxing, Trevor. So you do have the break. Malachi is a game time decision for our end of the week podcast with Luke, who I am happy to say that again, I'm sorry if I've been distracted, negotiating with him as on the other this is. This is mission control of Southside Sox. So on the other laptop, negotiating with him, he is back. I'm happy to say it was brief. We traded him very briefly. He is back for Dugout Metrics edition number 9. Where we're going to be talking a little bit of draft reaction, a little bit of what he is digging out of the numbers in terms of college performance, things to be excited about. I'm sure he's going to spin it mostly excited, things that are maybe, caution flag. That's going to be a fun one. Again, Malachi, game time decision on that one. But we will, believe it or not, have 2 Dugout Metrics episodes in just 1 week. It is unprecedented. And, of course, we're going to have to just readjust the entire budget really, this is just turning Southside Sox on its head now. The Dugout Metrics is back. So thank you, Trevor, for being part of that. Obviously, core member, original Dugout Metrics gangster. So thank you for showing up and fighting through the mute issue. Never mute again.
Thank you guys. This is always fun.
And Malachi,
Brett,
welcome to the team.
I have to stop you, Brett. Did you just use Yankees terminology a moment ago? Core 4. No.
God, I hope
core
not.
4?
How did I do? What did I do?
Core 4. Are you in Yankees land?
God, oh, geez. Well, Kangaroo Court fine for me. I will not be hosting the next Dugout Metrics. It will be Luke Smailes coming directly to you because I have put myself in the penalty box for that. That is out of hand. Thank you for catching me. Thank you for the hand slap. And, of course, we will determine my punishment after the podcast. Thank you for catching it, Malachi. Very, very spicy for your very first time on Dugout Metrics, but that's what we pay you for. So thank you for showing up. Again, we needed the arm. Keep loosening up. We need the arm. So, get to work. But, hope to see you on Dugout Metrics real soon as well. Thanks for being part of this. Yeah,
for sure. I'll get the shoulder warmed up. If it wasn't, it was pulled pork even before this past softball season, and it's even more shredded now. But we'll see what we can do.
Yes, next Dugout Metrics right up top. Before we get to any college draft picks, we will catch you up on the injured list status of all 4+ members, and we'll give you the complete rundown to see how we will carry on through the offseason. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Come back to us at Dugout Metrics, very, very popular podcast. So let's see if we can get those numbers right back up because you've just been waiting. You've been patient for 2 years. Thank you for waiting. Hopefully this is the delicious treat in your Christmas stocking. And we got another one coming just a few days. So hang tight. We really will be back sooner than you are ready for us.